So welcome to another ILC Home webinar. This is the second in the series where we're looking at the ongoing subjects of escape of water, which perhaps, I'm not sure have reduced in numbers, but certainly reduced in severity during lockdown, but that may change as we come out of lockdown to some extent. As with everything, we hope this helps. We're only here at ILC to be positive and let some of the good people that we've got on today discuss things which hopefully help the whole industry improve. Bring some subjects to light, which hopefully we can resolve between us for the benefit of our customer and at the end of the day, our bigger customers, the insurance companies as well. First of all, big thanks to our Homes Claims corporate partners, without whom none of this would be possible. So a big shout out to CoreLogic, Carpenters, the Innovation Group, iCab, with us today, SafeLine, SiteCall, and of course, Synergy. The last time couple of quick plugs for events. There's the news, events that actually could be physical the way things are going just now. You'll be hearing from us about our Home and Commercial Networking Lunch. This year we've got it on and booked in for the 1st of October, so hopefully that's going to take place at the normal location. We're looking forward to that. And then in Coventry on the 11th of November, we are planning our first conference for 2 years. That'll be a home and property conference with lots to discuss. Lots of what we discussed today will, of course, feed back into that. The last time we looked at escape of water, we looked a lot at the individual parts of it and the costs. Today, though that can't be ignored, we're going to take a look more at the process. And we're trying to see within the process of the bits that can reduce, that we can help take an approach to something which a couple of years ago we thought might have a magic solution, but we now know certainly doesn't have a magic solution, other than us talking to the planners about the way they build modern houses, trying to build less bathrooms, but we've not got the power to do that one, sadly. So we're going to look today at some of the equipment. We're going to take a look at some of what we use, some of the process we're getting here from maybe a couple of suppliers, what things could help reduce the amount of money they have to charge, because that, after all, is how you help your customers go. So big welcome to everybody's been on before. I think Neil maybe is new. But Will Quibell, welcome back. Will, now looking after things at Admiral Insurance. Neil, welcome. Neil Vickery from Coreventa. Coreventa, long-time supporters of ILC. Matthew Parker, welcome back. Matthew works with Procurator, who are consultants in the procurement world. And of course, another old friend of ILC and big backer from iCab, Tim Goodman, welcome back to you all. As I say, there's no magic answer to this, but taking a look at the process, one of the first things I would ask is, when we look to break down and take a look at how we deal with the escape of water, make it good for the policy holder and make it efficient and effective for the insurers. First question, I'll go to Will first, is, do you think we're analysing the processes in the right places when we look at this area, Will?
Industry-wide at times, but by and large, no. I think the word you use, process, is part of the problem. There is a process which a customer has to fall into. Most customers making a household claim and a water claim at that will have be going through it for the first time. And unlike a motor claim, where even if it's your first time, you'll have a fairly clear idea what will happen next. Most people won't know what will happen next, and they're telephoning their insurer at a point of stress. They're in distress. Something has happened to their home. And I think in terms of process, there are too many processes, and the customer will probably have a relatively jaundiced view of what should happen, which would be someone will come and put things right, and not necessarily have a view that there will be a loss adjuster, a dry-in and restoration supplier, an alternative accommodation supplier, a surveyor, a builder, a couple of more builders. And so I think perhaps we have over-processed it. For me, on the insurer side of the fence, Alan, there's two things which are absolutely critical and set the tone for the rest of the claim. The first is ensuring that the job gets to the right resource, the right person, the right company, at the first time, every time, on day one. That could be a DNR company, it could be a loss adjuster, it could be one of Tim's guys. That could be the first and most and only important thing on day one: get somebody into a new home, into accommodation or a hotel or a flat. So it's identification of the right resource first time, every time. And then secondly, it's just making sure that we identify the cases by complexity, simplistic, medium complexity, and high complexity. Most insurers will find that at day 30, day 50, day 60, their reserves jump. So if most insurers analyse their claims between 50 and 200,000 pounds for EOW, they'll probably find that 50% of those claims didn't start out with a reserve at 50,000. So if the insurer doesn't know that the claim is going to be complex, then they can't be telling the customer it's going to be complex. So already we've got a kind of a bottleneck of problems for the customer. So I've not really answered your question the way you wanted answered, but I think simplicity and less process is probably the way for insurers to go. You're on mute, Alan.
It's always me first. I do that so as that when any of the panelists do it, they don't feel any discomfort. You know, if you think that was an accident, you're absolutely right. Tim, going back to you, do you, from your part of it, and looking at it from where you pick it up, which can often be pretty early on, I guess, do you think we're analysing the process in the right place?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I think what Will said is spot on. There's often too many parts in the process that can complicate the matter. I think throughout this webinar, you're going to hear me talking a huge amount about timescales, and where the whole process falls down when you're talking about timescales. Obviously, talking from an accommodation perspective, escape of water is a really interesting part, because the process should tell us an accurate timescale in which accommodation is required. And often it's so different where it finishes to where it was at the start. So an initial instruction for 2 weeks for an escape of water claim, how can it end up being 4, 5, 6 months? And the choice of accommodation that's right for that policyholder for FNOL is very different to the end. And you're talking massive change in costs, which I'm sure we'll come on to a bit later. But I think timescales is really, really important when dealing with escape of water claims. I think we need to be much more specific on instructions with escape of water claims and how that looks. There are issues around who wants to accept liability by instructing on timescales. So there's a lot of these parts have an important part to play within the process when dealing with escape of water claims. But I certainly think there's a lot that we can do, and there's certainly a lot that we can learn from escape of water claims and how the claim ends up being from the start till the end, really. And I think there's a lot of work we could all do as an industry to improve it. And there are some as Will said, there are some good bits, and there's some bits that are done right. But I think that between us all, again, the classic word in our industry, collaboration. I mean, in escape of water claims, collaboration is key. When you have a restoration or a drying company telling a policyholder it's going to take 6 weeks for something to dry, and perhaps the accommodation part of it being told 2 weeks instruction at the start, and then there's that disconnect. So I really think there's some good work and positive stuff. Just by having this webinar, it's all positive and stuff we can all work on together.
Yeah, Matthew, you go in and advise people in this sort of thing. Is looking across the process, is that going to be a more effective way of trying to control the cost and get the service right than just simply buying it by part, buying it by, dryer, by a loss adjuster, by accommodation, and just, in the old days, I'm not saying that happens with all insurers now, but, is it now a matter of looking that way rather than just slicing it up in a salami style?
I would definitely say so. So when you look at total cost of claim and the total life cycle of claim, you see there's numerous delays in the cycle time where, maybe the builder's waiting for the drying certificate before they start work, or the approval process from the insurance company before work starts. Or that, there's a debate around, can you restore items or do you replace them? And I think if you start looking at that all adds to the cycle time of that claim, which is, not great for the customer who's out in the property. you combine that then with the cost as well, with all those discrete parts of a claim, and those suppliers were not necessarily all incentivized in the same way. So maybe they've got KPIs what don't align, or there's a focus on, say, maybe drying the room as a fixed cost rather than the total time or the total cost. So I think what's happened, and I think it's evolution. I think there was a lot of focus on getting the right cost base to start with, and I think that was probably right. And now it's taking that to the next level to say, how do we strip out elements of the process which is not required, and how do we align that supply chain up, either is individual suppliers more connected, or by maybe some sort of turnkey or super supplier. They're my initial thoughts anyway.
Neil, interestingly enough, though, behind all of this, now I don't think you physically go and dry anything, but behind this there is the equipment that is fundamental to escape of water claims often. And do we effectively use the equipment? In other words, if we use the equipment well all the time, would that have a positive impact on the process?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things we promote at Corroventa is targeted drying more, and we try to make sure that people use the right type of equipment at the right time of the claim, depending on the situation in the property and the climatic conditions. So, different dehumidifiers work in different ways. So the majority of the dehumidifiers that we use in the UK are condensers or refrigerant dehumidifiers. Now, they're really, really good dehumidifiers when there's plenty of moisture in the air and when the temperature is above 15 to 30 degrees C. As soon as you move out of those parameters, the performance of those machines, whichever manufacturer it is, diminish. And, we'll be dealing with flood claims in the middle of January when it's 2 degrees C, and then wondering why the dehumidifiers aren't drying the property sufficiently. So what we like to do is to promote what we call smarter drying. And it's really taking a step back and looking at the whole picture of the escape of water or the flood damage or whatever it might be, and say, what do I really need to do in this claim to actually maximise the drying potential I can create? Now, that can be working with the policyholder or the homeowner, working with the insurer, targeting the drying that needs to be done. And all these things need to be put into a consideration and reported back to insurers. And as was just said earlier, give the insurer the right information at the first point of visit. Let them know it might be more than what you can see at the moment that might need pressure drying, other areas may be affected, or make them aware that there's other conditions that they need to take into account, whether there's a rising dampness issue, a previous escape of water penetration, and make sure you don't encompass that within your drying regime, otherwise you never get away from that property.
Okay, that's interesting. Well, from your angle, I think there's a couple of things there. From insurer, one is the two-way communication. So, the first part of communication, which goes from the insurer to the supplier, and then there's the ease of communication back the way to hear any more information from the person that visits the sites, and that we all know that can vary from very well received from some insurers to perhaps not so well received from the others. And along with that, also this. I think Matthew talked about the KPIs. Do the KPIs interfere sometimes with the technical judgment? So somebody's in a quick time KPI, and I know you're not a huge supporter of these. Does that mean they might rush a decision, which means they might not take the time that Neil talked about there to check the temperature was right and to check it was the correct type of dehumidifiers? Are these kind of things which become conflicting parts of how we run the process?
100% across the industry. 100%. There obviously is a place for KPIs and SLAs. They hold their place contractually, and they're there to achieve a consistent approach for customers of insurers. However, they do at times drive the wrong behaviours. across the market. A really good example, the best example I could give, is if a loss adjuster has a KPI, an SLA of 2 days to visit, and they're financially or remunerated based on, or rewarded based on their SLA compliance, and then they'll do what they can to get out there within 2 days. Now, if it's a single parent with 3 kids working 2-3 different jobs and shifts, that might not be convenient for them. But that doesn't really matter, does it? Because it's the SLA or the KPI driving that behaviour. So certainly, to pick up on some of what Neil has referenced earlier in the call, one thing that I've observed in recent years is disaster and restoration companies attending site to hit the SLA, because they have to, because if they don't, then they are penalised or frowned upon by their insurer client. So I've seen examples in recent years of, well-established, respected DNR companies turning up and putting equipment on site but not turning it on. Which, if you think about it, if you entered this industry from a different sector, a different market altogether, it would really blow your mind, wouldn't it? But that is something that is quite unhealthy. And I think that they need to be there. They do need to be there, because we do need a consistent approach for customers. We have a duty to ensure that every customer has a similar, every customer in a similar claim, a similar water claim, has a similar outcome, to treat them all fairly. And so they do hold their place, Alan, but they drive behaviours that actually can be detrimental to what we're trying to achieve, which ultimately should be to shorten life cycles. Because if you shorten a life cycle, even shave 1 or 2 days off, the customer will get a better experience and the insurer's costs will go down. It's just simple insurance economics. Shave days off and things improve. But actually the SLAs can increase the life cycle. So personally, I'm not a huge proponent of using SLAs to measure suppliers.
I think that's fair, and I think as an industry we are beginning to hear a lot more of that. But the difficulty, of course, is how do we change that to effective forms of measurement? And that's not going to be an overnight thing without a lot of collaboration going on to some extent. I think it would be. Tim, sorry, I know we lost you. We're back there for a second. Let's look at it from process efficiency in alternative accommodation. Yeah. How do you make that step more efficient? How do you make it? And I'm not accusing you or any of the good people that we know worked so hard a year ago in the alternative accommodation industry to perform an overnight miracle, I think, at the beginning of the first lockdown. What will it take for you to make that process more efficient? One, from your own angle, but two, from the angle that those around you and elsewhere in the process can assist?
Again, coming back to the timescale at the beginning, it's also about us being allowed to manage it ourselves, managing the timescale that accommodation is required for, making sure that we manage the client's expectations, the policyholder's expectations. That's really, really key, because there's nothing worse than telling a client that we're going to book an accommodation for a certain amount of time, and then that timescale quadrupling. So it's about working with the other suppliers to know the correct timescales that are involved, and there's always going to be some movement. You're never going to get an exact timescale from the start. We all understand that as an industry. But if we can get close, then that's going to benefit everyone. And as Will just said, if you could shave off 2, 3, 4 days or a week off accommodation, it's a massive cost saving for insurer. We've also got to remember that the policyholders don't want to be in alternative accommodation. The quicker we can get them home, the happier they are, less complaints, etc., etc. So it is about getting them home quicker, making sure that we pick and choose the right accommodation for that policyholder. Doesn't necessarily mean an escape of water claim should have to be a hotel or a service department. It's about the solution, the accommodation solution, given what's gone on. And getting them home as quickly as possible and as happy as possible, and scoping out that claim from the very, very start. Working with the client, the demographics of every policyholder is different, and making sure that we look at that. And I suppose as that's from an accommodation point of view, and really just, again, working with our supplier partners to make sure that we're all going down the same route together, because we want to be aiming in the same direction and all working for the best possible outcome for that policyholder. And if we can get that right, then I think we're going to improve the process. You're on mute again, Alan.
Looking at it and putting myself on mute, you'd think after 50 webinars or whatever it is, of course maybe somebody else is putting me on mute, that's perfectly possible. Matthew, from a process perspective, I think I read something, and I think it was in the ILC news from Crocuto a couple of weeks ago that talked about, looking at various parts. It did use both drying and alternative accommodation as an example of saying keep costs down. But from what I'm hearing here, this isn't just a matter of looking at accommodation companies or a disaster recovery company saying keep your costs down. This is actually part of the overall process. So how do you reduce costs? How do you make the process better to make sure you can improve the service, reduce the timelines and keep the cost down?
So we've done some work in this area, I think, and there's some good work being done by people in the industry already, and some of the loss adjustment as well. I think it comes down to the basics for me of strong project management for some of these claims. So knowing at what stages of the claims things should happen and making sure they do happen, and picking up on alternative accommodation. If you know it's going to be a big claim, don't just book that customer in like we discussed for 2 weeks. So there's some like key decision rules which you can use as well. So what I've seen is where this operates effectively is where people are all joined up in terms of the process. They're all aligned, like some of the discussions we're talking around some of the KPIs. But there's somebody managing that process from start to finish, and to actually make sure that those things happen at the right time. And I agree, maybe 5 days on alternative accommodation, you spent maybe on average £500 extra on that claim. So even if just look at alternative accommodation, a 1 day delay, that's a massive impact. And you can look at that on the Net Promoter Score too for the customer. So I think it's doing the simple things well, but those simple things are not easy to do well when you've got lots of claims to manage, particularly if it's a weather event as well. But that for me is where I've seen the most effective use of a good process.
Mm. Interesting. I will come back when I get back to Will in a short while we can talk through more of that, because both of you have mentioned simple, but of course simple isn't always practical and easy to put into place. But before I go, Neil, back to you then. From what you said earlier, and if I've read this right, so you'll correct me, I'm sure if I haven't, what you're saying is if we can get the right technical information to the front end, and if the front end are motivated, measured by the right things, and the way Will was talking about, they shouldn't have to pay for your machines to be in place necessarily as long as they might be sometimes now.
Absolutely. I think what Will was saying before, the statement, what isn't measured isn't done, but reversely, the opposite happens. What is measured is done. So if you set the parameters of I want you there within so many hours and I want you site visits every 7 days, that's exactly what you're going to get. But going back from that, I think using the right equipment is essential. If you set it up right in the first instance, yes, you can dramatically reduce the drying time it will take on that project, but also you will reduce the amount of equipment that you need to dry that project. Now, it sounds adverse that an equipment manufacturer like ourselves would be promoting using less equipment, because we should want to sell as much as we can. But our whole philosophy is about doing the right thing at the right time in the right way to get the best results for everybody. And I think that's one thing that is lost within the industry, and we do get caught up with paper filling, ticking boxes, etc. But I think one big improvement that the insurers have made over recent years is they've onboarded people with real technical knowledge from the restoration industry to help get through the path and to fully understand what the restoration companies are trying to do, and hopefully lead to a better and more seamless process moving forward.
Mm. I think a lot of suppliers have a similar view, but I guess, well, back to that, we want to get the process simple, etc. But part of that, and I think you and I have discussed this a few times before, is one of the biggest areas is making the transitions smooth throughout the process. And in some of the ways that we have measured in the past, and I'm happy to say this because I don't want anybody else to get in trouble for doing this one, the way we've measured it and the way we've bought it means I've done my bit, stuff you do your bit, and when all belly goes belly up, everybody points at one another. But making that transition smooth should make it sure that how big a challenge is it to make that transition smooth for the insurer, who still needs to get the right information and still needs to be wary of the cost and the service, and of course still needs to be wary that things are progressing in the way they should.
Do you mean the transition from supplier to supplier?
No, the transition right through the process.
I think if we think about an escape of water claim, the average cost of an escape of water claim across the market varies between, and this is excluding kind of repudiations, varies between about £5,000 and £7,000. So let's settle at £6,000. That's what the UK market pay for their EOW claims. Mm-hmm. If for anybody that's had any building work done on their property that is even £3,000, £4,000, £5,000, £6,000, it never ever goes to plan, ever. If you're having a bathroom replaced, a kitchen replaced, you're having your garden re-landscaped like I am right now. It's just the nature of a project and of a scheme that things aren't. It's not like a contents claim. It's not like replacing an iPhone that someone has dropped, which we get thousands of those claims as well. It's a single transaction claim closed. So I think that sometimes we, as an industry, we search for simplicity when it isn't there. Asking someone not to use one of their bathrooms and two of their reception rooms and one of their bedrooms, but to stay in the property, that's going to create problems with the project, as an example. So I think we try to oversimplify, but I do think that the number of suppliers involved in some of these claims and the number of trades involved will just not lend itself to smooth transactions from one supplier to the next. I think as soon as you go beyond two suppliers, you're probably going to lose the job. You're going to lose the focus that the project needs. And so I think there's an opportunity for insurers on really low end claims, £1,000, £2,000, £3,000, £4,000 claims, just to have one supplier. Find a way on those water claims to engage with one principal tier one supplier. If you have a £3,000 claim and you introduce a DNR company, a loss adjuster, an IVP surveyor, and then they start introducing all their own individual trades, and then there's possibly a leak detection supplier involved as well. The claims handler probably doesn't know who they need to approach to find out what's happening. So the customer's probably going to have a real chore, a real job to be able to do that. So if we want to simplify it, and I think we've been talking about this for years, but if we want to simplify it and we want the transaction to be from supplier to insurer to supplier to be smooth, then and I've been saying this for years, we need less people involved in the claim from the outset, and one single point of contact, which surprisingly many escape of water claims don't have a single point of contact for the customer.
No, and again, part of the process to achieve that is probably going to be better communication and digitalization, which might make that an easier thing to do. But that's hard to invest in when your average policy cost per year is considerably less than it is in most other civilized countries. And that's part of the problem that people at Will have to wrestle with all the time is tighter margins and smaller costs. But moving on to you then, Tim, what would make it, how difficult is the communication? This is not going to go at anybody, but if there are multi-involvements between loss adjusters, drying companies, contractors, all doing the best to make sure their bit is done properly, how difficult is it to communicate between them unless there is the one contact, main contact, as Will has suggested?
It's difficult. What makes it difficult is that there's certain people within that process are allowed to sort of accept liability and make the calls. And so getting that person to commit to the right time scale, to booking something for longer rather than doing it bit by bit. The bigger picture is if you did it for a longer length in the first place, the cost savings are there. They're very, very cautious about overcommitting from an early part of the claim. So it is difficult to get that particular person, whoever it is, whether it be another supplier, adjuster, insurers, it doesn't matter who within the chain, but someone is very nervous to commit to that correct timescale from the start. And so what you end up happening is parts of the process being done bit by bit. And then you end up spending more money, the timescale going on. So to answer the question, it's difficult. It is difficult. And then, you won't have one particular person in the chain, or very rarely you'll have one particular person in the chain accepting full liability and saying, go out, guys, use your expertise and do what you think's right. So it ends up being bitty and choppy. And I think that's a bit of a problem in the process.
And that's right, Tim. But to be fair, we can't, if I'm sitting as an insurer, I can't sit and say, just use your expertise. I need to know it's going to save me money, because as we've said before, I think it's Laurel Lazarus from Aviva used to say this. I said it a few times and I Will's agreed with it. One, I need proof that I'm treating my customers really, really well. And secondly, we've just talked about this tight margins. The shareholders might just be a bit interested in me keeping proving to them that I'm saving them money. So Matthew, in that overall process, with that level of control, is it fair to say that if we could find a good way of reducing that process, single contact, all the kind of stuff the guys have been talking about, how much do you think that could shave off the cost of escape of water claims? It's a very rough question. It's probably a bit unfair, so I'll give you a leeway of 10% either way. And that's not saying, as Will says, early on, these answers he's putting are simple, but they aren't easy at all because they're complex to achieve. But how much do you think it could save?
So when I've done work in this area, and when I've looked at some of the external benchmarking reports, etc., and I see, what good and what bad looks like, I think you're looking at around 10 to 15% on average. You can take off by looking at the total cost. And depending on how mature that supply chain, that insurance company is, so I've just worked in the past looking at drying techniques and picking up on what we talked around here, where the wrong dryer's being used or the wrong equipment's being used for too long. That can easily have more cost in. But if you're looking at an average insurance company who were looking to focus on this, I think that's sort of number I would be confident in someone would be able to achieve. But you can't just do it looking at little elements of it. So those little elements all add up, and that's where you've got to look at, rather than just saying I'm going to look at restoration solution, I'm going to look at alternative accommodation. You might have a priority of which ones you do it in, but you've got a strategy, you've got a game plan of how it all comes together, and I think that's where you get the real value.
Okay, let's put Neil under a bit of pressure here as well, shall we? Broadly speaking, if everything was right, and the way Will and the guys are viewing it, and we could get the process more simple, we could get one or two good, steady, controlling contacts in it, and you were able to work with the right measurements with the disaster recovery companies. Roughly how much in terms of either time and or money do you think that could have an effect for the insurers?
Well, we have a thing here going slightly on the sideline saying our ambition is to avoid drying insanity, as we call it. And it worked on the Albert Einstein's philosophy of, if you keep doing the same thing time and time again and expecting a different result, that's insanity. And what really annoys us is where claims go on for 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks or more, and the technician feeds back, I'll come back in 7 days and we'll see how it's dried from then. And really, someone at that point needs to grab hold of the claim and say, what are you going to do differently now that in 7 days' time is going to give us a different result? If we can do that, you know, we could make massive differences on timeframes and costs. But if we use the equipment wisely, we target the areas we're trying to dry. From experience we've had across Europe, there's at least a 25 and possibly even 50% saving in energy consumption by the dehumidifiers. Now, Will tell me better than we really know, but we believe that the average compensation and insurance will pay for a policyholder for drying is around the £80 mark. So if you can save £20 on that and you've got 5,000 claims a year, you're already up at £100,000 saving. But it depends on how the procurement team can work with the insurers and the restoration contractors to actually maximise that return.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because this is always a matter of trying to reconcile the technical aspects with the modern customer service aspects, which are pretty demanding and speed oriented. But this is very rough, Will, it's very unfair. But again, do you think there's a reasonable amount to be shaved off the time in an average escape of water claim of between 5 and 7,000 if we can all get our acts together?
Yeah, weeks. You can take, sorry, if you hear anything in the background, my builders are, and point in question, they should have finished 2 weeks ago. So there we go. They're drilling away. Yeah, I think so. I think if you take the average claim, it's days, but some in the 10 to 25,000 region, comfortably, it could go for a £10,000 claim on average. That might across the industry look like 60 or 70 days for some insurers. Easily that could be 40, 45 days easily. Sometimes it takes 3 or 4 days or a week just to get moving, just to get the claim moving. And so the simple answer is yes, but it's not necessarily easy to get to that point. And I do think this is where, as insurers, we play the bigger role, the more important role, because understanding the complexity of the claim when the customer telephones is absolutely critical. And I can't understate how often in our industry, as I said this earlier, a 50, 75,000, 100,000 pound water claim started out with a reserve at 5 or 10,000. That just means that we haven't got the right people on site from the start. And so for me, you're talking days to weeks can be shaved off, and it should be able to happen.
Okay. And from your aspect, thanks, Will. From your aspect, Tim, how often do you think you're having to over or undercut what you've been asked to do initially in terms of the time factor and then alternative accommodation issue?
Yeah, I think it's a huge percentage where the timescale is wrong. Really high percentage. Very few claims stick to the original timescale. And on a cost-saving element, very, very briefly, quick case study. If you imagine a 6-week escape of water claim, and for example, 2 budget hotel rooms at £80 a room, add some food in there, parking, talking a couple of £100 a night. Okay, for 6 weeks is about £8,400. If you put them in a 2-bedroom apartment for that time scale, you're talking £4,600. A saving on one claim of just under £4,000. If we could have booked that apartment from day one, as opposed to the hotel and then extending because of the process, you're making considerable savings by picking the right accommodation subject to the timescale that it's required for. So from a cost saving, and an accommodation is a huge part of spend for insurers. So absolutely, by taking the timescales down, right timescale, right choice of accommodation, savings can be massive, really can be.
So I guess, Matt, back to you. It's not just a part of the overall process, been reduced, but it's also making the right decisions at the right time. And, let's be honest, we've said, it is effective. It's not easy always to turn up and make very accurate decisions when you arrive at escape of water. Yeah, there are several factors in there. So maybe maybe there's some time release at the front end, which I think was what Will was really implying. If we can get the right people, whatever the different costs to the front end of the process, we set it off in the right course and we can save money. So it's using the technical expertise at the right time. How do you factor that in to a procurement process?
So through the work I've done and the work I've seen, getting, different people have different views who should get to that claim first, whether it's a loss adjuster, a restoration company, the builder, etc. What I've seen is different insurance companies, have different people go into the claim and still have a good outcome. So I don't think it's necessarily who gets to the claim first. It's what they actually do and how quickly they get there and what corrective actions they put in place, and then how does that whole journey then kick off with everybody else in the journey. So I would, in my experience, focusing less on who gets there to how joined up they are and what they do when they get there. And I think people say you don't just get there and put equipment in and don't do anything with it. It's all joined up. So I think that would be my first observation. Then to answer your question around how does that link to the procurement process. So I think it's really looking at the end to end and saying, right, what is the strategy we're gonna employ here, and what's that category strategy for restoration? We spoke on this call here. Different escape of water claims require different actions. So maybe some might be more around just getting a restoration solution and alternative accommodation, but actually the customer wants cash settlements and wants to do some of that work themselves. Other customers want a full end-to-end solution. So I think it's marrying up what the customer wants to the right procurement, rather than one size fits all. And I think that's where a lot of insurance companies have gone down to say this is how we're going to manage all escape of water claims, rather than saying, right, this is the strategy procurement approach for this type of claim, this type of customer. I think people see a better output if they look at that.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach. Final word, I'm going to turn to Neil. Neil, we know that at the front end, the damage restoration companies arrive in all sorts of to all sorts of conditions and have to make assessments. You guys do training with your equipment yourselves. Is there good mileage, and does it happen that the damage restoration industry, whether it be manufacturers or those that actually go out and do the work, could educate perhaps some of the insurance company claims departments on better questions to ask to enable the sort of stuff that Will was talking about, to enable them to get off to the right start and be able to send the right people there to do stuff? Or does that really have to wait for somebody to get on site?
No, I think greater training across the whole board would be beneficial to everybody. We've had insurance companies in here, we've had loss adjusters in here, we've had claims handlers in here for training as well, and everybody has found it eye-opening, shall we say. The feedback we've had is extremely positive, and we look a lot on LinkedIn and we see things going on. The amount of restoration companies that have been in to see us, and then we see them doing the right thing on site, whether it's tenting or using the right equipment, is massive to us. It's really, really important. But I think that collaboration between the restoration companies and the partnership between them and insurers, if we could build on that further, we could all benefit, including ourselves as a supplier. 8% of Corriventra's whole employees are in research and development. That's how much we look towards the future and not dealing with today. And we are constantly asking our clients, what do you want in 5 years' time? What are you going to need? What are you going to experience? So if we can build on that collaboration and partnership, we can help design the future for people that are going to need it and make massive savings across the board in doing so.
Okay, thanks, Neil. One of the things I noticed, and as we build towards a conference later this year with, the many webinars we'll hold between now and then, it's an amazing amount of willingness there for everybody to improve and help each other do the process. And of course, ILC, that's what we're here. We're here to try and make everybody better tomorrow from what they learned today. But we are beginning to notice in some areas that, this energy, sometimes through force of the issues over the last year, is beginning to reap dividends. And I think what we'll do is we'll continue to work on Escape of Water and other areas between now and November, so that by the time we get there, we're hopefully looking at things that can really have a positive impact. And that takes a lot of openness, as we've had today from Will and the insurance companies all the way through the process. So first of all, Will, Neil, Matthew and Tim, thanks for your contribution. You guys will be back in another one in a few months' time to see if we really learned what we've learned more from that. The next time we do Escape of Water, we're going to look more at some of the preventative options, stopcocks, whether we can, the water flow, the leak detections, etc., what a difference that can make. And if it can make a difference, how do we fund it and where does it come in? And that's another big one. Any other issues you've got on that, please let me know at alan@iloveclaims.com. Always great to hear from you. Please also remember 1st of October, the ILC Home Commercial Networking Lunch, on the 11th of November, we will have the conference. Any issues you've got, contact me or Rachel Hunt or Nick. So that'll be Rachel@iloveclaims.com and Nick, NIC, no K in Nick, Nick@iloveclaims.com. Thank you all for listening. Hope to see you soon.